I'm not gonna say this is the easiest way to get wax and honey, but it's a way that if you didn't have a lot of money, you didn't have a lot of bees, and you didn't have a lot of equipment, it works. It gets the job done. And that's the position we're in. We have to make do with the little we have. It's all about getting food for winter.
Okay, why are we starting with such a messy bunch of ingredients and work? Well, it comes down to sealing up jars of jam. Now we're gonna whip up a large batch of fresh raspberry jam today on the wood-burning cook stove. But that won't do us much good unless we eat it all today or we find a way to keep it for the long days of winter ahead. And in history, they had their methods for keeping food without a freezer. And this one we're trying out today, this is one that everyone used to do. But I bet you haven't seen it done in 50 years.
This is one of the many jobs, certainly we take for granted today, that we don't have to do anymore.
Making fruit jam, it wasn't for fun back in the day. It was necessary for living through the winter.
And really, when we're talking about 1800s food preservation methods, they didn't have water bath canning yet. That hadn't really taken hold. It was invented in the 1800s, but it was nowhere to be found out here in the 1860s, 70s, 80s. No way. You were not going to find your little metal lid and metal band. No. But what you were going to find are tons of different food preservation methods.
And they got the job done. Today we're diving into two historic methods. One involves dipping paper in alcohols like moonshine, brandy, or whiskey to stave off the growth of mold on top of the jar. The second old school method involves sealing the top of the jar with a solid barrier, beeswax. But first, we've got to collect our ingredients.
But I love the idea of starting truly from scratch. We are going to get the honey in order to make this jam, and we're going to get the wax in order to seal this jam. That's so much cooler than going to the store and buying everything perfectly sorted and then just combining the ingredients in a pot. There's no honor in that, right?
Just a low, slow heat.
So we are officially doing it the hard way, the 1800s way, and it's going to take not just all day, but it's going to take multiple days. So I'm gonna pace myself. Just sit back and enjoy it.
Day one out here was spent cooking down the mush of beeswax and honey and debris from the hives. This I did all by my lonesome. Just me and the aroma of beeswax and honey.
Oh, I wish you guys could smell it in here right now. That honey and beeswax is just, the whole place is perfumed. It's incredible. Absolutely heaven. I need a book.
Day two kicked off the marathon of jam making and preserving. It all has to be done at once. The beeswax and honey mixture that we melted had separated, so the beeswax rose to the top and the honey sunk to the bottom. So by day two, everything was ready to pull apart, which is easier said than done.
Beeswax really is such a hard wax. When it's pure like this and it solidifies, it is hard to get out of stuff. It doesn't shrink very much, which for candle making is a pain. But for this, where we're putting it on the top of our canning jars, this is the perfect thing because shrinkage will cause spoilage. So the less it shrinks, the better. But for my job right now, it's making it very difficult because I need to separate this wax and honey. The wax is on the top, the honey's on the bottom. Well, I can't get this piece of wax to pop out of my big cook pot. So I'm trying to melt the edges just enough that I can take this out. But that is never as easy as it sounds. And it's why things like canning and food preservation, they always take so much longer than on paper they seem like they do, because you run into hiccups like this. This may not be a part of everyday canning in this era, but this would have been one in history. And ideally, you would have had your mixtures all separated long before canning day, but I like to make it hard on myself and do everything all at once. Whew, not easy. Preserving fruits by making jam and putting them in pots or jelly jars, That was widespread.
Dead bug.
Absolutely everyone did that because you needed vitamin C in the winter. And you weren't gonna find any fresh berries for not just a couple months, but month after month after month. A good solid 8 months of the year here, you're not gonna find vitamin C. So you had to have a way to preserve it. The really old way would have been to make pemmican, where you smashed up meat and choke cherries, service berries, pounded them all into a loaf, pressed it, and carried that with you. That was a fantastic survival food source. But something like a raspberry jam, if you could get raspberries, gooseberries, currants, I've done it with red currants, who are actually very high in vitamin C. They make a wonderful survival jelly. Some wild raspberries might be around. Choke cherries are going to by far be the one around here. If you're a little bit more to the west, you'd have huckleberries. All of those fruits are perfect for jam making. Today we happen to have a glut of raspberries, so that's what we're using. But the same method applies for all of them. You need that acidity. So that's where our lemons come in. Obviously, citrus was not readily available out here in the northwest part of America back in the 1800s. It wasn't really until the trains started to come through that you could get an orange for Christmas or get lemons like this for cooking. They were really special because getting a fresh lemon, highly unlikely. They probably would have used citron or something similar or any sort of other acid. But in all the recipes I looked up, this is one of those ingredients we cannot omit from our raspberry jam. We need the acidity of the lemon. You could get the acidity through some other means, but they're much more difficult to come by in today's world. A lemon is our closest bet. So it's gonna change the pH of this jam so that not only it thickens better, but that it stays safe once it's in its jar or once we've canned it. Okay, raspberry jam. We're putting our lemon in. I'm gonna put 2 lemons in today because I figure I have about maybe a little less than a gallon of raspberries going into this big copper pot. So 2 lemons is gonna do it for us, and then we're gonna talk sugar, because we're not using straight white sugar. White refined sugar was hard to come by back in the day out here on the frontier, but you really need it in jam making. You can't skimp. If you don't put enough sugar in, this is gonna go bad. So although it seems like a horrendous amount that we're gonna use today, certainly for the time period, this would have been a real penny pinching heartbreak of a thing to put all this sugar in. But just a small amount of jam goes a long way. So maybe you made 10 jars of jam. Those were treasures, and they got you through the winter.
You really have to use some refined sugar in jam. In fact, you have to use a lot of it. We're going to add 7 to 8 cups of it in this recipe today. The guidelines call for 6 cups of sugar for every 9 cups of berries. That's a pretty high ratio.
4 cups of sugar, 5 cups of sugar, 6 cups of sugar.
But to save money, as any homesteader would certainly have been desperate to do when it comes to expensive, refined cane sugar, we are going to cut this recipe with something we can raise ourselves, or at least buy locally right here from a neighbor: honey. But extracting honey from hives, it is a lot of work. A lot of time spent separating.
It's amazing.
It's wax.
Ew, what's that stuff on the bottom?
This is called slum gum.
What's slum gum?
Slum gum is all the gunk and muck that comes off of the wax.
This stuff was inside a beehive not that long ago.
Isn't this stuff wild, Minnow?
Yeah, you made a lot of beeswax.
I did. Yep, we're gonna go put this on the garden next, because Tom says it's really good for the garden. We do have a bunch of beeswax in this, but I'm not too worried about it. That's solidified. So I'm gonna filter some more of this mixture in our pot, and hopefully we're gonna get honey. It's not gonna be the best honey, it's not gonna be the perfect golden honey. This is kind of the dregs. But for something like canning, this is fantastic. It doesn't need to be beautiful. It just needs to have the sugar content to preserve the fruit. Okay, here we go.
The wax and honey are separated, and any debris left over in the beehives is getting filtered out by that cheesecloth. So there's no dirt in this honey. But I'll warn you, this starts to get tricky. Food preservation is a science after all, And when I start messing with the modern recipes that I'm used to, I can get myself into real trouble fast.
I bumped into the woman who taught me to can out at the rodeo this weekend. So this wonderful woman, Denise, taught me to can more than a decade ago. She was a local extension agent for our county, and I had never canned in my life, but living off grid, I had to learn. That was a really important skill, and one I was starting completely from scratch on. So I bumped into her yesterday at the Stanford Rodeo, and I said, Denise, I need to pick your brain because I'm gonna do some canning and food preservation, but I wanna do it the 1800s way. And as I'm saying it, I realized if I tell this woman my idea for canning using beeswax and honey, she's gonna lose her mind. I mean, this is not the epitome of food safety. We've learned a lot in the last 100 years, even the last 50 years, about how to safely preserve food. And these old-fashioned ways, they are not the safest. So about halfway through telling her my plans for today, I decided to keep my mouth shut. I'm sure she'll get a kick out of this, but I must remember to tell you guys, don't follow this advice. I think this is probably as food safe as it gets. I'm following all the best guidelines for today, but of course, sealing jars or sealing ceramic vessels with beeswax, that is not gonna kill off any bacteria. The hot water bath canning method where you boil the jars with metal rings and seals for 10 to 20 minutes, that's how you keep your food scientifically safe. So, okay, base is covered. I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna test it, and I'm gonna eat it. But I'm not telling you should. And Denise, if you're watching this, I know the right way to do it, but I wanna experiment with history.
Okay, so we've got our jam simmering away on the cook stove. It's time to add that honey that we've worked so many days to get purified and ready to go. With the addition of about 2 cups of honey, we should be at the amount of sugar needed for this recipe, for preservation. We need to check it though. It should have a high enough acidity level from the lemon and a high enough sugar content from the sugar we've added that it's gonna start to go from liquid and pulp to a thickened jam.
Yeah. Here, Max, will you bring me that metal bowl?
This.
Perfect. Now, remember, everything's hot.
And I'm
Okay,
scared.
now we're gonna let that cool for a second. Okay.
Nope, it's not there yet, so we have to keep cooking it down.
So the first time I ever made jam or jelly, I tried using choke cherries, and this was 15 years ago. And I had never done this before, so I took a canning class. I watched someone do it, and I thought, okay, yeah, I get it. I get the science behind it. So I went home, I picked all these choke cherries, and I decided I was gonna make choke cherry jelly. So I cooked them down, took all the juice, put it in a big pot, and I started to boil it down to reduce that water out so it'll thicken into a jam, into a jelly, right? So there's a test you do where you take a spoon and you dip it in the mixture after about, 15, 20 minutes, and you see how it drips off of the spoon, or you pour it onto a plate and then you pull at it with your fingernail, and it should kind of have some consistency to it. It shouldn't be a liquid anymore, right? Okay, but younger me grasped the concept, but I didn't really understand. So after about 20 minutes, I tested it and it still kind of looked like a liquid to me. After 30 minutes, did it again, it still kind of looked like a liquid to me. So I just kept going. And I cooked that choke cherry juice down for, I think, about an hour and 20 minutes. And it just kind of still looked like a liquid to me, but I figured that had to be good enough, because that was a lot longer than I remember the canning instructor doing it. So I poured it into my glass jars, I sealed them, and then I put them in the big canning pot, and I did the hot water bath method for the allotted amount of time for our altitude, and pulled them out, set them all nicely arranged on my countertop, and I left them to cool. And I came back the next day expecting to find beautiful choke cherry jelly. And the color was gorgeous, and I opened one of the jars, and I tipped it a little bit, and nothing happened, and I tipped it back the other way, and nothing happened. And so I stuck my finger into it, and I realized I hadn't made jelly. I had made rock candy. And rock candy encased in a glass jar. In order to get it out, I would have had to have broken the jars. So I had to throw out not only all of the jelly I made, but all of the glass jars that I made it in, because I had cooked that mixture down within an inch of its life until it literally became rock. So I don't want to do that today, but I've equally made the mistake in years since of not cooking it long enough, and so you kind of end up with a thin syrup, and that's great. You can use it on pancakes, you can use it on whatever, but to get the perfect consistency of jam, so not liquid syrup and not rock candy, but jam, that's not that easy. It's why we have store-bought pectin that you can add into the mixture. That's definitely not something they would have had in the 1800s, and it's not something you really need if you know how to do these skills properly. But that takes a lot of practice, and that's what we want. Working with experienced cooks, watching them, watching how they do it, and knowing when they think it's right.
Wanna lick some?
Because they have the feel for how to make this.
What do you think?
I can't taste it.
You can't taste it?
No, I meant it's going to taste delicious. I just can't get some on the spoon.
Okay, I can tell that the look of the jam is right. It's time to get it off. The lemon and the honey seem to have done the jobs that we can gauge with our eyes. That acidity and sugar will prevent mold and bacterial growth within it. But if we just leave this exposed, the air is going to get into it, and that will ruin it in a short period of time. So this is where 1800s food preservation techniques become critical.
Okay, this is kind of a cool trick. So in addition to sealing jars with wax, which commonly would have been paraffin wax, that was one that a lot of people still remember their grandmothers using, but beeswax would be something we could actually make ourselves. In the 1800s, we could keep bees out here, and beeswax is a product along with honey that you get from bees. So there's paraffin wax, there's beeswax. That's one way of sealing up your jars. But when I was looking through old cookbooks, there's a way that was even more common. And honestly, it's still common in places like Great Britain. And that is using paper and alcohol to seal your jars. No wax, no canning. You take pieces of paper, cut in a ring, which in England you can buy them pre-cut in a ring at the store. This is legit. You dip them in alcohol, and then you lay that circle over the lid of your jar. But I want to soak some paper in alcohol and actually do this. And the alcohol prevents any bacteria from growing on the top of whatever food you have. And if your food has enough acidity or sugar in it, no mold can grow. So it's preserved and it'll keep on a shelf. Or, always a good idea to put things in a cellar or somewhere cool if you can, but shelf stable. So let's do both methods today. We've got the beeswax method going. I'm about to pour it in and put it on top of our jars. Never done it before. Let's try it. Hot. Oh man, I managed to splatter raspberry juice on my favorite shirt. This is proof of why a proper full-length apron is so important. If you were a woman with one, maybe two dresses, this would be a real problem, because that meant you had to wash it or it was stained forever. So a full-length apron, just like the one we're working on with our singer sewer, yeah, it was really important. Oh darn.
All right, here goes nothing. Beeswax straight on top. I don't know if I should keep it hot, let it cool, or just gonna have to go with it. But I can see almost immediately that beeswax is starting to solidify and harden. But we won't know if we've succeeded or failed for a while. It could be months. When we pop the wax off of these jars, we'll have to use our senses to tell us if all is well. Any mold or foul odors, and the jam has to be tossed. Now, a homesteader probably would have just scraped any mold off and kept eating it. The presence of botulism is the greater worry, and for that we have to rely on our math of adding sugar and berries in the right proportion. Honey counts for almost double the amount of dried sugar in a recipe like this because it is in fact more sweet and dense. But there aren't that many recipes out there to reference. This is pretty old school, so I'm out on a limb here all by myself.
Sometimes I think it's a lot more fun to show the failures and to show the learning curve than it is to sit here and say, look how beautiful and perfect everything is on the first try. Because it never is beautiful and perfect on the first try. That takes work. As you guys know, nothing ever really goes smoothly out here in the cabin. Robbie jokes we're gonna get a sign that says, Cabin of Disappointment, for how often we start something expecting one result and end up with a completely different one. Okay, all the canning jars are cooling, the beeswax is solidifying. I think we've got the perfect conditions for everything to set up. I'm curious how the alcohol and paper is gonna do, because although it's really close to the right size, it's not perfectly the right size. That may be a critical error, but we'll have to wait and see. I think next week we should try to bake something with this jam. Not sure what. Any suggestions, put them in the comments. And I hope if you aren't subscribed, you'll hit that subscribe button and see what we make with the 1800s raspberry preserves. I don't think it'll kill us this first week, but we'll see a few months in how this jam is doing. It's a big experiment. And remember, I'm not recommending these preserving methods, but honestly, a lot of them probably work great. And it's sort of good to know if the world all went to hell in a handbasket, that we don't need to buy factory metal rings and tops in order to preserve our food. So I think it's worth trying. If nothing else, it makes us appreciate all the things we have in our modern world that make life so convenient and easy. Thanks for hanging in the cabin with us. Hope to see you next week. Cheers. You got it. Good job. Good job.
Don't look yet. A basketball. A basketball.
A basketball. Too cool.